I kjølvannet av angrepet mot Twin Towers i 2001 og president George W. Bush påfølgende definisjon av «the axis of evil», så fulgte John Cleese opp med å utpeke ytterligere noen akser som han mente fortjente å havne i søkelyset. En av de aksene var aksen av land som slutter på Guay, Uruguay, Paraguay og Norway. Og jeg står her nå for å gi dere et lite innblikk i tilværelsen og livsfornemmelsen til Nordens mest ukjente og miskjente folkeslag, norguianerne. Det var alltid vi som ble værende for å holde seg pal, var det vi gjorde, det var skikken vår. Hadde man fjernet oss med tvang, ville det etterlatt en flekk, og den flekken ville ikke vært til å fjerne. Den ville vært oss, mer enn kroppene våre. Slik har vi tenkt når vi tenkte oss det utenkelige. Men ingen har brydd seg med å fjerne oss, og kanskje er det nettopp derfor vi likevel har begynt å mistenke at flekken vår har forlatt oss. Den fornordiske endelsen guai betyr urikkelig, stedegen og duggfersk. Dette siste har vi bare delvis klart å skjønne oss på, men vi kalte det guai der vi var. Å være guai var å være oss. Guai var hjem for oss. Rundt oss reiste folk av sted, mens andre kom vandrende til. Noen måtte over tregrensa, andre søkte seg til skogens mørke. Enkelte prøvde å finne en plett som sola kunne nå frem til. Atter andre foretrakk stjerneklare netter over snødekte vidder. Mange ville bort fra folk, og noen, litt færre, ville til der det var folk fra før. Bare vi beveget oss aldri av flekken. Men dette hjalp oss i lengden lite, for selve landskapet migrerte med tiden under og omkring oss. Ja, selv dette med Norden tar vi med en klype salt. For et landskap er i bunn og grunn like troløst oppdaget vi som en himmel full av skyer. Og den skyete himmelen er i sin tur en hukommelse uten eier. Et kær og et kåti der ingen bor. Det fjellet vi alltid hadde kalt for vårt, det ble til en grushaug, til et deponi, til en glødende elv, til en sandbanke, en bunker. Hva skjedde da med ordet vårt for fjell, med ordet vårt for urikkelig? Hva skjedde med selve ordet vårt? Vi ble værende, ja, men det som dermed skjedde med oss, det kunne vi ikke ta inn over oss, og det var da heller ikke skikken vår å gjøre det. Et fjell er uansett bare et litt mer standhaftig rykte, sprekker og surkling, og etter hvert sangkorn som spres i vann og i vind. Når stareflokken bretter ut sin vifte foran fjellet, ser det sin skjebne skrevet i sekundene om å innse at årtusenene er en illusjon. Og fra det øyeblikket ønsker det selv å smuldre opp og bevege seg i bølgeform som flokk. Ja, der så en kan lure på om også vår eneste egentlige skidda er dette øyeblikket som vi lever. Det øyeblikket som alltid går over og likevel aldri blir borte. Nå har det ikke alltid vært bare oss her på stedet, for vi hadde en gang et nabofolk. Men av dette folket har vi kun bevart en diftong, noen omlyder og en glotal stopp. De sank ned i en lomme som lukket seg rundt dem. I alle fall er det som myrfolket vi kjenner dem, uten egentlig å huske om det hadde seg slik også mens de fantes. Ikke engang om de var greie å ha med å gjøre, eller om det kan ha vært vi som drev dem uti og nektet å hale dem opp. Men noen av dem skal ha reddet seg over til oss, og språket deres lå der og gnisset mot vårt, for det er ikke lett å verne seg mot slik reagens. Støtt kommer ord, rennende med strømmen, flyende med vinden, avsatt i ballastvann eller droppet som fugleskitt, for å blande seg med dem vi kaller våre, som prøver å berge seg akkurat som folk, samtidig som de strever for å pleie landskapet, holde på det i den betydningen kroppene våre til enhver tid har gitt det. Og dermed tar ordene tilflukt i kroppen, der de mest trofaste kan finne på å synke ned i fortapelsen eller forskjønnelsen, og bli ugjennomskinnelige som perler rundt sandkorn, vakre og betydningsløse i våre hjemmers brakkvann, mens de mer tilpasningsdyktige blant dem holder seg i drift og skifter valør etter den kroppsdelen de ankommer. Antakelig det også derfor at kroppen på enkelte dager kan våkne så fremmed, selv i et landskap den aldri har rikket seg fra. Og når både landskapet og ordene i drift, hva skal en stakkar egentlig foreta seg for ikke å flytte hjemmefra? De stolteste blant oss har aldri vært i nabobygda, og dette kjernen vår. Dette det innerste i oss, vårt ur-guai. Hva det da som oppstår, eller forblir som før, når nabobygda ikke lenger finnes? Som en forfatter en gang skrev, det skjærer seg i hodet på eplehunden, den dagen det faller en frukt ned fra treet den sitter under, og den frukten viser seg å være en pære. Antagelig så lider vi både av hjemlengsel og av utferdstrang, og begge deler bare så lite guai. Det guai mangler som ordet hjem har, retningen. Dette at hem et sted man ikke nødvendigvis men kan dra til. Aheim, angerlamot, for så ved bevegelsens slutt å være heima, keri. Men også selv ordet for hjem, til og med guai, tvunget til å reise. Og det vi med størst mulig vegring og frykt må spørre oss hvor mye kan det reise? Hvor fort kan det reise, og hvor stort lass kan det bære? Og hva skjer med den kroppen som blir med på lasset? Nye ord for hjem jo aldri velkomne. Helst skal ordet for hjem være navnet på alt du lever i, alt du puster og drømmer, og som omslutter deg, enten du elsker, slåss eller holder på å stusse nesehårene. Slik ordet for folk skal være ordet for menneske, og ordet for jorda være ordet for jord. Likevel altså en reise innskrevet i ordet hjem. Og kanskje finnes det et flyktig språk som møter mellom reisen og hjemmet avstedkommer, et som bare stareflokken kan artikulere i forbigående. Heimvist der hjertet ditt heter det, men akkurat hjertet vårt flyttet ut av ordet sitt for lenge siden, ettersom vi ikke var til å rikke. Og på den måten skulle vi la oss lede til å se på alle ting og alle ord med nye øyne, i tilfelle hjertet hadde tatt logi i dem, eller latt seg røve av dem, noe vi selvfølgelig likevel nektet å gjøre. Noen sier til og med at myrfolket tok hjertet vårt med seg, men slik sladder i hvert fall hjerteløs, for ikke å si svagt begrunnet, som myra selv. Enkelte besøkende har iblant, gjerne ut på kvelden, påstått at vi burde oppfatte all denne bevegelsen rundt oss og i oss som et svar på vår standhaftighet, som en korreks. Et forsøk på å få oss til å innse at albeit og gåtje og kåtona faktisk et annet sted. Og selv om det smertefullt å innrømme dette, har tanken sippret inn i oss som medisin, eller snarere i litt større dose som gift. Kanskje det fordi vi aldri har flyttet på oss at vi ikke lenger vet hvem vi og det vår omvendte hemmelighet, vår hellige uvitenhet, som om vi skulle ligne kjernen i den hemmeligheten alle de andre har. De som kom vandrende langs iskanter, gjennom skoger eller over sletter, fordrevet av nød eller krig, eller rett og slett underveis fordi de hadde det for vane. Alle de som dermed fikk med seg slike mengder av fortid, og pleie, og sørge, og besynge, og miste. Denne tråden som blir bare mer verdifull, jo tynnere den spinnes, og som brister slik et eldgammelt hjerte sprenges en deilig død. Vi alene, som alltid har vært her, synes henvist til fremtiden, der vår eneste mulige heim befinner seg, vår råkto. Problemet, mener noen, bare at fremtiden strengt tatt aldri kommer. Og det nettopp det, sier andre, som poenget, at der det hjemmet vi kan ha. Et hjem som aldri vil oppgi oss, vi som alle ting forlot, fordi vi svek dem med vår trofasthet. Her hadde det i grunnen passet å slutte, men det må likevel bli sagt at det som sårer oss aller mest, når vi hører hva de andre kaller oss, at de bruker ordet myrfolket om oss, og ikke har klart for seg hvem som sank ned og ble borte, og hvem som tross alt har holdt det gående i historiens løp. Ja, for skulle det være oss selv vi begravde den gangen, hva er da igjen av oss, nå som ikke engang myra lenger finnes? Antakelig ikke noe annet enn dette øyeblikket, mellom den fortida som viser seg like så lunefull som landskapet, og den heim vi aldri får. Dette er strengen som synger i norguianernes hjerte, det som var nødt til å forlate dem, for fortsatt å klare å banke for dem. Takk.
Thank you so much, Gunstein Bakke, for this commissioned work written especially for us. Anna will tell you a bit more about the poetry connected to the conference in a little while. But all of us would like to warmly welcome you to Bergen and the second conference for the Nordic Cultural Journals. My name is Maria Fell. I work at Nätverkstan in Gothenburg. When many of us met in Gothenburg 2.5 years ago, we started the new Nordic network, and Nätverkstan was asked to coordinate the work and to make sure that we all got to meet again. And now we're finally here. A bit delayed, but still. We hope this conference will give all of us an opportunity to deepen the relations between us and thereby simplify future cooperation. As you notice, the main language for this conference is English. Of course, you're allowed to speak any language you would like, but on stage, we will try to keep it to English to be more inclusive this time. And now, at the meeting in Gothenburg, there were a lot of talk about all the things going on in Norway, and especially in Bergen. It soon felt like the natural place to arrange the second conference, and it's been a great pleasure to work together with Inga and Tekstalmenningen. And I would like to say thank you and give the word to Inga.
When we were in Gothenburg, Tekstalmenningen was still just on the drawing board. It was not until 2020 that Tekstallianse, with grants from the Arts Council and the Fritt Ord Foundation, established the company and pressed the start button. We were to create a system for subscription management, distribution, and sale of cultural journals in Norway. I must admit that I thought, how hard can it be? It was surprisingly difficult. We needed an infrastructure that would work today and in the future. People said, yes, we can do it. It costs 2 million kroner. Or no one can do that. But we can do something else. Or this is no problem. We fix it. And then they do not fix it. But they send an invoice for what they did not fix. And they refuse to spend Norwegian tax money for things that are not fixed. And then we have to find someone new who can actually fix it. The first year of Tekstalmenningen was a lot of negotiation, but we are getting there. We have also investigated the VAT rules, written many letters with the Norwegian tax administration, and we had meeting with Posten Norge to discuss the postage and freight costs. We are striving to get the journals out in the libraries all over the country. We are now creating a new ordering platform for retailers. Inmates in Bergen prison make boxes for us that we will use for self-service sales. We will also establish a journal outlet in Bergen. Next week, we release our first digital subscriptions. We also really want to find a sustainable economic model for sales of Norwegian cultural journals in all the Nordic countries. We try to adapt to all the journals' existing systems and individual needs. We receive various information from different journals and we try to make it work. We take care of all the licenses, the money, the GDPR. We pack journals and bring them to the post office. We send distribution lists to printing houses. We keep track of stock. We receive the calls from customers who have not received their journal or who want the invoice in the other Norwegian written language. Cancellations for subscribers who have passed away and handwritten letters that says, "I am now 98 years old and can no longer read the text." We receive piles of returns and track down new addresses. We post on social media and we send out newsletters and we make surprise subscriptions and special deals for you. We do all these things with the vision of strengthening the cultural journals. We want to relieve the editorial staff of all this administrative work and release resources for the editors. We want to decrease the costs and increase their revenues. We want the journals to have a stable foundation and healthy condition for growth. And we want the audience to have a positive customer experience. And we really, deep in our hearts, believe that that is possible. To achieve this, we need to understand how you work and what you need. This conference is for Tekstamenningen a golden opportunity to get to know you better and get the understanding needed to contribute. I would like to thank you all for the work you do every single day and for participating today and taking part in this community that we need for the development of the Nordic cultural journals. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's really great to be back 2.5 years after. And actually, at that time in Göteborg, there was this idea that arrived and aroused as we discussed different topics that sometimes there are so many languages in the northern countries and some of us are really passionate about them. So it's not always the case that we get to hear all of them in the original version. So if we have a conference in Norway or Sweden, whatever, we might not hear any Faroese or some other languages that are spoken in these countries. So that's why we had this idea to kind of point out this beautiful diversity, and what better way than through poetry, because this is a way to actually feel the language without necessarily understanding the words. So this is how the idea arrived, and in order to curate this program, we decided to create a team of people from different Nordic countries to work towards finding 10. We ended up finding 10 poets that would send in their poetry in the digital form and present their work. So in this collective of people, of curators, we had 5 people, like I said. Sigbjørn Skåden, who is a Sami author from Norway. We had Helene Fagertun from Sweden. I had my notes in Norwegian. Very bad idea. She's an author. She's a translator. She used to be editor of Province magazine from northern Sweden. Then we had Lars Emil Votman from Denmark, Danish poet. And he's also a micro publisher. He started this micro publishing house called Kronstock in Denmark. We had Kimmo Kallio from Finland, of Poesia in Finland, and me, Anna Stanicevic, of Iceland. And I have too many hats, as you can see. I tried to fit them all, but it didn't work. I used to be editor of this Icelandic magazine. Starafugl, which is taking a break at the moment because it's just, done on free basis and, like this really, it's sometimes hard to keep it going for a long time. I also was a guest editor at Kritiker, which is a Scandinavian magazine. We just did the double issue of it last December. So check it out. It actually has this topic of, different languages and different positions on the margins, being on the margins of language and in between languages. And yes, I'm also a researcher, translator, and poet myself. And so we came together and we met up a few times online, and we talked. We tried to brainstorm all the languages that could possibly come, into consideration, and we ended up brainstorming a lot of poets of these different languages, and actually a little sheet will be found on the platform. You can see the process of our work, where you can see all the poets who didn't make it in the final cut, because we needed to, just choose 10, and we wanted to represent as many as possible. Of course, this is just scratching the surface, and we also had this really this idea of bringing, of representation. So not necessarily poets who write in their mother tongue, or poets with different background, and so on and so forth. Even the languages that are not originally from the Nordic countries, but who that exist here and are spoken in large numbers. So we ended up, you will see, it's already on the platform. Maybe some of you have watched the program. You will be able to see it in the background in our room, but also later on. We have Farsi, Icelandic, Southern Sami, Meänkieli, Greenlandic, Arabic, Danish, Faroese, Swedish, and Finnish. I won't be representing and presenting all the poets. You will get the chance to do that. So I have many things to say about this, but you will notice that there are no translations. So, and the idea with this is just to, give it a chance, give it a listen, maybe even discover that you actually understand more Icelandic than you thought, or just get curious about the sound of a language and maybe try to look up the poet in question. And most of the poets are kind of newer poets, not necessarily very established. This was also kind of one line of thinking. So I hope you will get a chance to experience some new people and then check out the sheet which we wrote with many others. So, and this is of course not exhausted. There's many more. But I hope this was a fine selection for you all to get a little taste of the diversity in the Nordic countries and the Nordic literature. Yeah.
Hi. So we got a database with names for poets speaking Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish, Danish, Icelandic, Greenland-ish. Yeah. From Faroe Island, Nordsamisk, Sörsamisk, Lulesamisk, Finlandssvensk, Meänkieli, Kvensk, Yiddish, Farsi, Arabic. But this is a database now, so would you like it? Would you like to see it? Yeah, but how could we do that? Well, we have a platform now. It's our hope and wish to use this platform. It's called CoAO. We've been talking about it already. And this is the platform for our network. We will use it during this hybrid conference, and everything will be saved there. And so you can continue networking even after these 2 days. And all the talks that you see here is also published there, and you can watch it later or maybe send a link to someone who missed it. And our ambition is to create a home for this network between the conferences and other physical events. And also there's an expo room where your journal now is represented. I've just made it, so it might be some changes to be done, and you can do it. And you can also link documents, create meetings, and get in touch with others. I would like you to log in there and make sure that your personal profile is added to the journal you represent. because this is something I have done and I have maybe not done it correctly. So if it's not, just write me a message to me in CoAO and I will fix it there. My name is Anders Teglund, by the way. So during this conference, we want you to use the forum function. It means that you don't ask questions openly in the air here in the room. You write it down at the platform. So when you have a question to the panel or the speakers, write it down there. Some might be answered on stage, but the questions that are not answered here live will be answered later on in the forum by the speakers afterwards. You understand? It's the first step of getting a digital meeting point. And later on this year, we will start to publish more talks on CoAO. So we will have an all-digital seminar there. And if you have any questions or ideas of how CoAO could be worked, that it's not maybe now, you can have a wish and we ask them to do it. Just come up to us and tell us. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Helena and I work at Nätverkstan in Gothenburg, Sweden. To coordinate the program, we work together with the program committee with representatives from 5 Nordic countries. The committee highlighted 2 main topics while discussing this conference. The first one concerns diversity and translation, which also became the main topic for the conference. Today we will be listening to 1 seminar and 3 case studies on this topic. The other topic that came up was digitalization. Partly due to the COVID situation, digitalization has been very present in this conference, since we're also realizing it on the CoAO platform. But we will also highlight it later further on, because we're going to do a digital seminar during the fall. Tomorrow, those of you who are still here in Bergen will take part of a workshop where we will discuss the future of the network for Nordic culture journals. And the discussions will later on be summarized on the platform. So you will all be able to take part of it, either you're here or if you are on your computer. The talks today will be moderated by Norwegian author and playwright Kamara Lundestad-Jof. And I will now welcome Kamara and the first panel for the day, and up on stage. And while we do that, while we set the stage, we will listen to a poem by the Greenlandic poet Nivjak Corneliusson.
Уллоққанерлуунит нуаннертигисимагатуарпат ампулангсиник саниоққуттоқарнери тамааса камматит аннилаангалерсарпут нипааруллутик сианерфигитинниссақ аллаффигитинниссақ Facebook кимуллу исерниссақ аннилаангагилерсарпаат илами имаассиннаамат налунгисана наасиит тоқусимасо анаанаат иллуораат каммалаатаат адуарфиумми силалаанииллутик ампулангси саниоққуттоқ исигиваат ампулангси тимминник ассартуисо тассанили налуаат иллиусо 22 эққаамаюассаватсигит Facebook кими аллариарлутик таакеқаттаарпаатсит кисианни truth is икиттуарарсуит эққаамассаваатсит синнерими ингерлаққиссаппут ammut scrollereqqissapпут иллоqarfimmilu takusoriaangammitsit aatsaat eqqaaqilaartassavaatsit eqqarsartassapпут no usi akornatsinnikkunnaarnikuuvut 20 inuneritamaat eqqakittarineqarnikuuvutsit ilaquttaniit ilaquttanut børnehjemmimut biuminaqaatsit napparsimavimmiit kommunimut iginneqariarlutit napparsimavimmut uteqqillutit ikiorneqarsinnaangilatit oqarput pisuusoqanngitso 12 toqungilaataa unatartikkusuppunga pinngitsaalineqarlunga pinngitsaalinerit pigaangata eqqarsartarpunga arnat allat pinnagit uanga pinngitsaaliniarsinga ussut ilunni taava eqqarsassagaluarpunga maana toqusinnaalerpunga ilami pillarneqareerpunga 7 pisareriangami tarniga piniaruk nunap ataanut iliverniaruk ammoruyussuaq aniuingisaanarniassaaq ammoruyussuaq 5 soorlu kisitsit puuyoriaana kisitsiinavikkaani tammartarto eqqarsarpusi eqqaamaneqarumaarto kisitseqqilerussili ata takussavarsi tammariataarto tassa uanga taamaappunga 4 neriorsorpassi taamannak ajungiinnerpaapo anniarneq ilissinnuttutsittagara anniarneq taana tammassaa erloqinartarunnaassaanga kamaruyussuartarunnaassaanga neriorsuinerluttarunnaassaanga misileeqattaaginnaruma anniartinassavassi misileeqinniangilanga
Let's give that an applause. Okay, hello. My name is Kamara Lundestad Jof, and I am a translator, author, and the playwright in residence at the National Theatre of Norway. And I am joined here today by, let's see, Jonas. Can you see us? Can we hear you? No. Say something. Mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hey, Mike, who's going to check you? We will try to get sound on Jonas, but you can hear.
I have sound now, I think.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this
Hello.
is hello. It's lovely. Can you see Jonas, Coco? Can you see him from where you're sitting?
A little bit, yes.
A little bit. Is it possible to turn
angle.
the screen a bit so Coco can see? If you can still see him, so Coco can see Jonas as well.
A little bit better.
But I'm not much to see, really, so...
You look great from here. It's nice to see you digitally. We have only spoken on the phone. Jonas Axelsson from Sweden is the CEO and publisher at bokförlaget Polaris. And Coco Hubara from Finland is the former editor-in-chief of, how do I say it, Ruskeat Tytot?
Ruskeat Tytot, yes.
Tytot, yeah, Bruna flickor.
Yes.
And translator of both Roxane Gay and Toni Morrison into Finnish. And we've been tasked with the conversation today surrounding the Amanda Gorman debate that was running rampant globally the past year. And I guess we all just have to start with acknowledging that it's not every day that the business of literary translation becomes a source of public controversy. Usually it goes by very, very quietly. But I think it's been very important for both our craft and our businesses to have parts of that conversation lifted up into the public debates, because translation is something that very often happens in the shadows. And to just say very, very quickly, for those who are not that oriented in the Amanda Gorman debate, was that Amanda Gorman, a young Black American poet, read her poem, The Hill We Climb, at the inauguration of President Joe Biden in 2021, who went viral instantly. And publishing houses all around the world scrambled to get the rights to translate the poem and publish it as quick as possibly. Very quickly, that debate turned into who should be allowed to translate this poem. Some of the translators who had also been approved by Amanda Gorman felt that the public debate became so hostile and that they were unsure if they were the right people to do it, concerning that a lot of activists had a lot of demands regarding that the translator should A, be young, B, female, and unapologetically black, as a lot of them wrote. Some translators quit and stepped out of the spotlight, and some translators, speaking of Spain, were fired and asked to recline the contracts that they had already signed. And this debate has been going on for quite some time. It was also a huge literary debate in Norway. And Jonas, you have published it at your publishing house, the book single, I guess we can call it, the poem, The Hill We Climb, Berget vi bestiger, where the more famously known as Timbuktu, the hip-hop artist Jason Diakité has translated it. And now you are also in the process of translating or working with the rights of the collection of poems. Will you tell us a bit about your experience as a publisher following this debate and still standing in it, in a sense?
I will at least try. Well, we got the Swedish rights, and we rather quickly understood that it was quite important to find translators that could be accepted by the agent in New York, Amanda Gorman's agent. And this is not really unusual nowadays, where you need an approval for almost everything when you publish something from at least London and New York. It could be the cover, it could be the translator, it could be something else. But when the conditions turned up, it was more than I'd seen before. And it grew a bit, because it started with, we need a translator that has the same kind of experience as Amanda Gorman. And at that point, I asked Jason Diakité if he was interested, because I thought he had some neutral grounds, really. His father is black and lives in America, and he's bilingual, and he's a spoken word artist and a hip-hop star as well. And he was extremely glad that he got the question. And since Miss Gorman knew Jason as an artist, as Timbuktu, she was glad as well. And after that, after the approval, the rest of the conditions turned up. They would prefer a woman, a young woman as well, and some other things as well. But at that point, we already had Jason on board, and he did an excellent job with the poem. And it got published, and we didn't have much of a debate in Sweden, really, about this. But it was just, as we say in Sweden, just one poem, very small book, 31 pages, and we waited for the collection. And then I got the collection, and I realized immediately this is impossible for Jason to do, so I will think of some other people. And then at this point, this is 6 months later, I've asked more than 10 translators, and they are all been young women and black. But everyone says no, they don't want to do it. They can't do it, no time, or they don't want to do it. So I'm a publisher without a translator at the moment. So, and I went back to the agents through the co-agent in Sweden, saying, would it be possible to just propose a person who is competent enough to do the work? and leave the rest of the conditions behind? And I haven't got an answer yet. So I'm waiting for the answer. That's his sort of a description of the situation regarding us.
Thank you. But Coco, you are a translator. And regarding the Amanda Gorman debate, in the beginning, if I've understood it correctly, you actually applied in Finland to be the translator for the book. How did that go?
Yes, so at that point I had translated Roxane Gay and Toni Morrison, and I was contacted by the Finnish publishing house Tammi that got the contract for the Gorman book, and they asked me to consult first to give them names of possible translators, and they wanted someone who's a young woman of color. And at that point they said woman of color, not black woman, and they told me I could also apply. And I applied. I wrote this. They actually asked me to write a letter to Amanda Gorman explaining exactly who I am. And I remember saying something that, I'm a single mother first, and I'm a translator, and I write fiction, and I write nonfiction and essays, and I teach creative writing to kids of color in Finland and stuff like that. And she didn't want me, she chose someone else. And by the time the whole process was through and I realized I didn't get the job, I was actually so relieved, because I had seen what was starting to be going on and the conversation that was starting, and I was like, nope, I've had my share as a Finnish person who writes about race and gender in Finland of these media outbursts and these attacks, actual verbal attacks on my person. So I was like, thank God she didn't want me. And then the people who were chosen in Finland were Aura Nurmi, who's a white poet and spoken word artist and teacher of creative writing, and Laura Eklund-Naga, who's a black spoken word artist, actress, and she's actually studying sociology with an emphasis on race, critical race studies. So a nice combination of experts. And even before, in my previous translation work, I've been working with other people. I've never translated a whole book by myself. I always had someone with me. And for the Roxane Gay book, for example, I worked with Anu Partanen, who's worked in translations for over 30 years. And she had that expertise, that long expertise of how to translate into the Finnish language. And I came along with an expertise on questions of pop culture, race, gender, and the things Roxane Gay writes about. So I think this kind of working with somebody or working as a group is also a nice option.
That, at least for me, that was the entry point of getting into translation. I had no interest on going into translation as an author myself, mainly because it pays really poorly. It does. It is very hard to recruit new translators, I can see, because translation in the end pays quite poorly. It's an underappreciated craft.
Let's say it's almost like a hobby.
Yeah.
You get to end up paying more than you actually make.
You often do. And I've been thinking about it a lot in regards to the Amanda Gorman debate. Because as you're saying, Jonas, having asked 10 people who on paper would be the perfect right candidates to translate the work, they have all declined. And I do remember when the debate started running, the day after the inauguration in Norway, I woke up to, I think, 17 emails from Norwegian publishers and newspapers and magazines who wanted it translated now, and could you do it, and we're trying to secure the rights. That everybody was throwing themselves into this new pop culture phenomenon of political speeches and art. I remember, first of all, just saying, no, I don't work with slam poetry. I've never translated slam poetry. I have no interest in working with slam poetry personally within my field of expertise. That's not what I do, so I am not the right fit for this. And then it was, but you're black. I am, but I'm still not a slam poet. Even though a lot of people assume that I am not a slam poet. I work with non-fiction writing, essays and memoirs. But the debates that happened in the Netherlands and the debates that happened in Spain very quickly took over the debate in Norway about who should do this, who should not do this. And in Norway, it was Mariam Idris, who is an author herself and a young woman of color who got the job of translating for Gyldendal Publishing House. And you know, I think when every publishing house in the world, it felt like for a second, wanted to go on this like pop culture travel to be relevant, to get that audience, to be part of all those millions of likes. Not a lot of people took the time to stop and also ask, this performative poem, how will it do in writing? How will it be received, read, instead of performed, as it was during the inauguration? So the reviews for the book single, The Poem, in Norway were quite critical. It was 1 out of 6 stars, because we do the roll of the dice, so it's like terningkast 1. This is really bad poetry. This should not be published. That was a lot of the discussion. But what you could see that instead of discussing Amanda Gorman's poem, people started discussing Mariam Idris's skin color. This is what happened when you choose skin color and gender and youth before competency. And suddenly, Mariam Idris had, by the entire reviewer Norway, but also by her colleagues and the public debate, been declared incompetent. And the Facebook commentary fields that followed were gruesome to watch. And it has to be said that Mariam Idris has a master's from Oxford, I think Cambridge. She has a master's in literature from Cambridge. It's not her first translation. She has also published 2 books herself. But suddenly, all her competency was also erased from the Norwegian public debates, and she was just the affirmative action translator. And I think for a lot of people considering going into the arts, watching that kind of debate, seeing that kind of public slaughter, would make a lot of people be, as you were, relieved that you didn't get it, or relieved that you didn't say yes, because the cost of being the translator of Amanda Gorman suddenly became way higher than the fee for actually translating the book. But have you, in Sweden, made any thoughts? Have you followed the debates that happened around the world, and also the debates that happened in Oslo, and thought, like, how would you, in that case, take care of a translator that would stand in that kind of shitstorm, I guess I would call it? As a publishing house, where does your responsibility go to when you choose to translate a book and put people like in that public sphere?
I have to be honest and say I haven't followed Norway that much. I've been aware.
Nobody does. It's fine.
No.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about how do you act as a publisher when something like this happens, of course it would be a very natural thing to stand up for the translator. I mean, you picked the person and you paid the person, and of course you have to be responsible for something that happens around the whole project. It's quite important. I mean, we have a sort of jurisdiction surrounding book publication that is different if you compare it to the news or journalism, which means the author and the translator is more in the front when it comes to what is a mistake or not. But it doesn't mean that the publisher is not guilty. We are really part of it, because we made the decision, we buy the rights, and we wanted to sell, and we want to earn some money and credibility through that. So I would say if something like that happens to the books we publish, I need to be very much in the public to defend what we are doing.
But,
does it make sense?
Yes, it very much makes sense. But when you then, as a publisher, get these kinds of demands, because, as you said, these demands that were made now in the next iteration of publishing Amanda Gorman's collection of poems. You said that this is the first time you have experienced these very kind of specific demands. Has there been a lot of talk within the publishing world how you receive these kinds of demands?
Not much discussion, really. But I think it's because of the pandemic, really. Because we haven't had the sort of the network going on like we used to have. We have book fairs when we really meet, and I haven't met the other publishers of Amanda Gorman, for instance, for a very long time. And I don't think emails is a good tool to discuss this. You need to meet people up in your face to discuss things like this, because this is really complicated, to be honest, as a publisher at least. And I'm used to talk Swedish, so as you can hear, my poor English doesn't make it easier to explain my feelings or thoughts about this. But I mean, competence is a sort of a ground rule when it comes to publishing. You can't get into quality without competence. And to translate books, you would always love to have the best translator on board. But what is the best translator when it comes to a text or an author like this? Then it suddenly becomes something else when we discuss this. And it's both interesting and very important and quite difficult to meet when you discuss it. We haven't talked about gender and the racial part so much before in publishing. And suddenly it happens. And this is post Me Too as well. So it's very demanding to be a publisher, especially when you're, quite a mature white guy like me. I don't have the tools immediately. I have to really learn a lot before I'm saying something that is a real mistake.
But Coco, as an author yourself, also having the experience of being translated and translating others, when you hear about these very specific criteria made by Amanda Gorman's publishing house, as an artist, how do you receive it?
Well, first I have to say something about competence and quality before I get into this. It's very interesting to me that we are now talking about competence and quality. Just this week I was reading 2 books that were translated into Finnish. One of them was translated from Swedish and one of them was translated from English. And they are very big bestseller books that I was reading. And one of them was a really shitty translation, don't know the skin color of the translator, and one of them was a really good translation. I happen to know who the translator is, and I know she's a white person. And I mean, we can talk about the quality of translations and the competence of the translators if we want to talk about that, you know. We can talk about that all day, about the education of the translation, about who gets to enter through what kinds of channels, how much we pay to translators if they have enough time to get into the work. But to bring up the question of competence and quality when we are trying to talk about race and whiteness and privilege and power and the racist history of these countries that we are trying to work in peace, then I feel like it's a little bit this question about trying to kind of disrupt the actual conversation that we're trying to have. That's how I feel, a little bit. But as an artist, when you write a book, no matter the genre or no matter what it is, you are always controlling the whole process. I mean, if you don't control the process, then there's no book. When my white writer friend writes a book, we control the editor we work with. I only work with one person because that's the person I like. He's a white, cis male. That's the one person I like. Not very woke in all the questions that I sometimes write about, but we have nice conversations about these things. But he's the person that I trust the most in this world when it comes to my writing. He understands what I'm trying to do. I control the length of the book, the words that I use, every single sentence. I control what I want as the cover of the book. I talk to the PR people and I want to control how the book will be marketed, what kind of, who is the influencer that it gets sent to, that it gets the kind of, visibility on social media or whatever. I mean, those are the things that I control. And I also want to know who will narrate the audiobook, and I want to know who the translators are, and I want to have conversations with them. And I mean, that's how bookmaking works. That's how literature works. So I mean, different authors have different kinds of ways to go about these things. Some people are way more controlling than others, and some want to do these specific long lists. And for me, when I was working on this whole thing, on this whole Amanda Gorman translation as a consultant and bringing in possible translators and stuff like that, it was very clear to me what Amanda Gorman was trying to do. I don't think it's coming out of this hatred of I don't want white people to touch my work, or I don't like the way they do it, or I don't trust them, or whatever, or hatred, or some kind of like reverse racism, if you will, that doesn't, of course, exist. It's about wanting to make this structural problem visible. Because when I said, for example, when I published my first book and the journalists were starting to call me for interviews, and I said, yeah, you can come, but I want a photographer of color to take my photos. I don't want there to be a white gaze. And they were like, but we don't have any. Well, that's the problem. It's not that I don't actually want the white photographer to take my photo. It's to make that problem visible and to start the conversation. Okay, but now you see you have a problem. Why aren't there any people of color working as photojournalists in the big newspapers in Finland? And, that, to me, was what Amanda Gorman was also trying to do, to show, that we need to make space for these people who are so underrepresented in literature and in translation. And then, especially in the Nordic countries that are so hyper white. I don't know if this is a Finnish thing or if this is something that they came up with, if it's a translation, but they call it neon white in Finland. It's so white that it's just blinding. And, and especially in that context, to make these things visible, I think was what she was aiming to do, to take it out of the African-American experience and African-American context and show that this structure and this issue is actually happening all over the world.
And as you say, Jonas, that this conversation is quite new in the publishing houses in Sweden, you said earlier. And why do you think that is? Because there has been translations of black artists and black writers into Swedish or Norwegian for decades now. But the conversation regarding who gets to translate what is still quite fresh. Do you have any thoughts about how that... Do you have to make these kinds of demands to make that conversation visible, since it has not been visible before? And does it have to be a demand and not a suggestion to make the publisher be aware of their own problems? Because if it's a suggestion, then you can choose not to.
A good question. I think it's a good point to really ask for visibility regarding these questions. I like that. I think it's important, and I can see the why it's sort of a casual question, but what it comes from, really. But the problem is it's mixed with a sort of commercial thinking, because this business is built on trust. When you buy rights, you buy it through trust, really. You show what you like by reading the text and become interested, and in a way you pitch your company, who you are and why you want to cooperate regarding this, and then you get these demands. It becomes if you like or not like, it's like colonialism in the other way around, really. If I knew the demands before I get the opportunity to read, I would love this sort of the suggested situation. You can choose this or that, and it would be lovely to also have a sort of an approval connected to it. But I feel that I'm out of the game, really. Should I be, if I can't be the publisher of this, should I be a reader of this? In my eyes, I should be the first reader to Amanda's poem, because I should learn and understand. But it becomes tricky when I can't choose the translator I want to. So maybe this is part of a sort of a mix between something which is really necessary through the younger generations, but it's also a very American way to conquer the world. But because at one point I asked them, should we translate it all? We could read it in English, everyone, instead, because that's the original version, and the rest seems to be a problem. And this is a big discussion in the business. Maybe you heard about the big 5 houses. They are global now. Penguin Random House is the biggest publishing house in the world. They are publishing in English everywhere, and in Spanish, and in the big languages. HarperCollins is having the same rights. Our biggest publisher in Sweden nowadays is Bonnier, and they are selling the same book to their own countries, their own publishing houses in the different countries, to keep them there. So it becomes a sort of powerhouse at the same time. It's a battle going on here. And I'm making it more complicated. I understand that when I give you a sort of a bigger picture.
We can handle some complication. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is because of we have a digital world nowadays. So there is no real borders except the language. And the streaming platforms, they are invading all the countries surrounding where it started. We have Storytel in Sweden, that's 25 countries soon. And they want rights for every country. And they don't care about the quality regarding the translations. And as you said before, they don't get sort of a thumbs down because of the shitty translation, because it's just audio or something like that. But when we try to do a proper translation of a literary book, it becomes a big debate. So it's sort of a chaos going on, and I can't see the end of it.
Would you like to comment?
Yes, just that I think this is a very valid point, actually. And when we are talking about translating things into the Nordic languages, I mean, what we are working on is actually something very important. We are preserving these small languages, Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, and even the smallest languages, like the Sami languages. It's so important what we're actually doing. I mean, it is. Even now, I'm starting to work on my PhD now, and I was returning my research plan to the university, and it was in Finnish. And when I wrote the whole plan in Finnish, they assumed that I was going to do the dissertation in English. So they automatically wrote, she's doing it in English. And I said, no, I'm not doing it in English. I'm doing it in Finnish because I want to be a part of this, preserving this language, and I want to be the person who brings out new concepts, for example, regarding race and gender, into the Finnish language, because we don't have words for things like person of color and stuff like that. So what we are doing here is very important, and I think that when translators and writers come from these minority positions, when they come from multicultural, multilingual backgrounds, or they have this lived experience of being marginalized or being a member of the minority, they can actually have something to contribute to this work of preserving these small languages. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we should be included in these conversations and why the doors should be, open.
And I think there are two different aspects there, at least personally, that I have experienced in my career. I think as an author, I have experienced several times, and also as a playwright, and maybe I have to stress the fact that I am also known to be very difficult. And I am very difficult when it comes to releasing my work. But as an author, being translated into German and into English and into a lot of languages that I don't know, that I don't have the opportunity or the possibility to check the quality of the translation, I am completely in the hands of my publishing house or the theater, my agent, or to give that trust that you're saying, that the trust between the publishing houses. And I think that that's not to single out different translators, but I have experienced, for instance, being translated into German, not being able to read it, asking my publishing house and asking that publishing house, asking the editors, and is it okay? How does it translate? And everybody's, oh, it's very competent. And that person has translated a lot of other famous Norwegians. And this is really, really good. And then calling my queer friend, Ellie, who speaks German and Norwegian, because she's an immigrant to Norway, asking, can you read the book just in German, just to be sure? And to be called up and say, oh, fuck, they turned your book racist. To say, what do you mean racist? No, because you are describing navigating your body within a Nordic context in 2018, and the translator is using language from 1992. And there is no one at the publishing house who has the experience or the competency or the interest in those kinds of aspects of political language enough to pick that up. So to allow the book to be published in the way that has been suggested would essentially turn my anti-racist literature into a racist happening. And to know that even though the majority of the publishing houses talk about trust in that way, when they did the head count in Norway, it was only 6 out of 602 employees at the Norwegian publishing houses that were people of color. That is under 1%. So and I'm not saying that a white person cannot have that competency, not have that look, to have that eye to see, oh, this is what's happened with the text, and this is what's happening with the language in Germany and the political movements there to make it relatable to what's happening in Norway in 2018. But as you're saying, the conversation within the publishing houses is so new. To consider these aspects of translations are so new that this has been happening for years already.
Yep.
Yep, yes, no sound. I was like, where are you? But yes, you are there. It's a speaker. No. And then I think that another aspect is the other way around when you are working with a language. When I was translating Claudia Rankine's Citizen to Norwegian, I was realizing that I was creating new racist language that did not exist in Norwegian. Because the slurs that she is writing about in her poems are so very specific to an American context that to translate them into Norwegian, I would effectively have to create new racist slurs to have them translatable here. And that was a discussion I had a lot with the Swedish translator and the Danish translator, who were both white, and then me and my co-translator, who was also a white woman, but was working with her PhD on norm critique and whiteness within Norwegian literature. And for us to sit there and create this very specific new racist language in new Norwegian, even, to find that way was quite challenging. And the publishing house that we love and that we are a part of, we're not prepared for that to be an issue, because that discussion had not yet happened within the structures of the house. So the question is, now that these debates are happening, even though they're also part of this bigger global debate about how American imperialism and how capitalism is the root of everything. Everything. How do you think the publishing houses should move forward? What's the next step now? Not just regarding like the Amanda Gorman debate, which I feel that we are more and more just like trying to move a bit away from. But how can the publishing houses take responsibility for these blind zones and for these structures that mean that we are still repeating these kinds of experiences, at least some of us are, that are navigating this industry?
Well, look at the sports, for instance. Nowadays, it's money and agents all around the place. And even in our business, the agents are ruling the whole thing. They, especially when it comes to the bigger names from US and UK, their demands is the demands that we have to really follow. And that's the real challenge for us, to find a way to not follow them all the time and stand up for what we think is right for the author and the book. Sometimes you shouldn't buy the rights if you can't follow the demands in the right kind of way. So we need more experience, more discussions about what kind of situation we have today. We don't talk enough about gender and the younger generations and why books or text or stories is crucial even for them. What kind of stories should we focus on? So there is so much happening at the same time, really. And we call it translation when we had this talk together. But as a matter of fact, when it comes to Miss Gorman, it's interpretation, really. It becomes something else when it turns up in a new language. And that's an even bigger task to find a way to make it happen in a great way. I just want to say that. But I don't have a really good answer besides that, really. We have to take it seriously, and we need to, I think we have to be a bit more domestic and hope that we have the authors back home. We don't need to import them at that much.
Coco?
What's the next step?
What's the next step, but also, is that the solution, or not solution, but to focus more domestically and less internationally? Is it the agents that are standing like the gatekeepers of language and the demands?
I will just give you an example, because I'm publishing a rock memoir, Bono's, in November. And I've been struggling with his PR manager for weeks, because the quote from Bono himself, in my translation into Swedish, is not good enough. They think Google Translate is better. Yeah, because they understand Google Translate, they don't understand what I'm saying. So that's just to give you an image of my situation.
Sure. But we also, yeah, that is tragic. But also you can't like escape from that with the notion of Bono, but the thing that the Amanda Gorman debate also with her demands opened up was also the kind of complete homogeneous setup of the Scandinavian, the Nordic, the European publishing houses. And at least in my experience, then every time we try to have these debates, we kind of try to move away from the racial aspect of it when we're talking domestically, because we also have to talk about how our own publishing houses look like, how they work, how our structures are, if there are photographers, if you have editors, if you have people within the individual publishing houses in the Nordic regions that have this competency, that is not just being asked for by Amanda Gorman's team in the United States, but that artists of color within the Nordic region are asking for every day. and asking where is it, when is it happening, how is it going to be. And I think that it's important to see those kinds of responsibilities together. But since we are running out of time here, would you like to say something in the end, Coco, about where you think this is going?
Well, yes.
Is it healthy, or is it just like, is it just so polarized right now that it's becoming impossible to talk about? I think this is the first time I have had that Amanda Gorman conversation without anyone shouting.
Yeah, this is actually a very healthy.
This is a very healthy, healthy
yes,
space. Yes.
Very safe. I think, well, if I think of Finland, I think I work with a lot of different publishers. I consult and I have conversations and I educate them and all kinds of things. What I see now is that they are actually very open to these questions. They are willing to have conversations. 5 years ago, it was very disrespectful and very closed and angry and
dismissive.
Dismissive is a great word. And now it's actually open, and I feel like I'm being treated as a real writer, and I'm being treated as a real partner in conversation and as an adult, actual adult human being. And I see that they are even investing money in getting education for the staff and things like that. And that's the way to go. I mean, and then the bigger question of like who gets into these schools and universities where they study literature and translation, who is invited and who is pushed out of those environments. Because when I was in university, I was always the only non-white person in my class. For 16 years I studied in the university, and I was always the only one or out of two. And then another thing is I've started to look into this concept of ancestral work, which is like an indigenous concept of whatever we're doing now, the knowledge we're producing right now, the results might not be visible in our lifetime. So in order to not to burn out right now, when we're trying to make this change happen, I always think of myself as this ancestor, somebody looking at what I did 300 years ago, and then some change happened. Because if I'm trying to achieve everything this week or in my lifetime, I'm just gonna get tired and give up. So maybe ancestral work for publishing houses to kind of get started, not to delay it, but to understand that it's going to take its own time.
Thank you. Jonas, thank you so much. And Coco, thank you so much for coming and sharing your thoughts and experiences regarding this very tricky debate. I think there's going to be a poem and then a break now. So then we will just sign off and say thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Det är så sant som det är sagt där. Så är samfällighetens tanke att den är utan att den ska döma. I de här olika byar vi har samlats idag är det ordnat så. Och aldrig heller man kan köpa sig, man blir mer utvald. I byar som resonerar liknande finns dålig plats åt äldste bröder. Och enda vi säger synd menar vi det som trist. Men om du har kommit idag som är sådan att du hoppas annat, så fundera först för vad vi lever som vi gör och inte alls vem. Och fråga sen vad hände med senaste folket som ville annat, men som tog in alldeles för mycket av det där andliga. Så pass att de trodde sig särskilt utvald och skulle bygga nytt. Att redan 5:e veckan sa vi åt dem att försvinn härifrån. Och sur var de och skulle läsa förbannelser också. Se sen till att vad vi bygger samhällen bara ska rasa. Om de inte hade haft huvudet i molnen hade de sett så mycket tomma nästan byar det står överallt här. Och som gör vi behöver inte bygga alls nytt. Hör ni kamrater och likasinnade, idag får vi lyssna ännu några till som den här redogörelsen. Morgondagen har vi bättre för oss vi ska hinna med. Och det igår vi hann är inte man måste surra mer om. Men idag lyssnar vi så vi blir rustad för månader fram. Och vi är inte annars heller att det måste mässas och ha sig. Ja, sådant är lätt att det blir till slut bara fantasier. Håll kvar bara det vi har sagt hela tiden lika. Den som aldrig kunnat med förmän och kommer därför hit. Den ska knappast vilja heller välja någon här. Och mäktar man inte utan är man tillåten lämna.
Valtiatun aktab trohpab vielie. Verta jes aimene, koska vaimoa kalkot jaktsat. Mulle räihkiä mjälkencher jeien vestia. Ja don perjes kaikese peirä. Peirä touletsa muarua ja maatua. Säikies vuota le latskan nimmenä lahtestahta. Jäikö meijässä koltl, kossa le bie kerramenia. Man läp apsen armoaks jahta. Apsen bjahtia doama. Ja alla mötsta tarpesikuit laaven juestat. Pyrje valjom vyöseätet. Ja tejes bjarkatit. Siamma saat mei heannata.
Hörde dere meg nå?
Yeah.
You hear me? Yes. Kan vi ta Lisa litt? Eller? Yes. We should speak English, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I have no problem with that. Nice to see you. Nice to see new faces actually here in Bergen, because we usually see all the time the same faces. It's interesting because 2 years ago, actually, this magazine was only a Facebook page, and now suddenly we are invited to this conference among other journals in Nordic countries. Dar is a bilingual journal. It speaks both Arabic and Norwegian because we want to include and integrate Norwegians in our culture, traditions, and our problems, not the least. Just I will say a little bit about myself so you know the human standing in front of you. My name is Osama Shaheen. I'm the editor and founder of Dar. And my main job actually is a journalist. I work in Bete, which is a local newspaper here in Bergen. That was chosen as the best newspaper in Norway 2 weeks ago. I'm very happy that you're not speaking your Nordic languages because I will not understand anything. I'm originally from Palestine. My Norwegian is not my mother tongue. I'm originally from Palestine, but I was born and grew up in Syria as a stateless Palestinian refugee. I have nothing to do with literature back in the day. I was only interested in literature. I studied as a dentist, and I worked as a surgeon. And during the revolution, or what media like to call it, the civil war, I worked as a doctor for 24 hours in a hospital, day and night. And then, as millions of Syrians, I took the trip to Europe. Luckily, I ended up in Norway. So I came to this country 6 years ago. As others, I spent the first period to little navigate, waiting for asylum application, and then start studying Norwegian. I have to say that I'm privileged and lucky because I came to Norway as a single man who doesn't have children. I was 26 years old at that time. I was very young. And I come from an academic family. Norwegian is my 5th language, so it was easy to study it. But I shared the classroom with other men who actually, they were waiting for their family to come, their children. They haven't seen them in years. So the task for learning the language was very difficult for them. And then I moved. I was studying in the north, beautiful city, beautiful landscapes, but 50,000 people. It was so difficult to survive. So I moved to Bergen. And here they told me, hello, Osama, you can't work here as a dentist. You have to repeat all your education. Actually, not only from the first year, but you have to go even to the high school and take some chemistry. I was crazy a bit to take this challenge. So I was in the high school for 1 week, and then I told them, no, I'm not crazy. I'm not that crazy to do it. So I chose actually to study something completely different. I took gender studies, and I did my master in masculinity and how masculinity as an identity changed itself when someone migrates from a country to another. And during my time of studying, I was working in all the jobs that immigrants can work with, because I say immigrants because we can't work with all the jobs that for other people. So first I worked in a nursing home, and then I worked as interpreter. And there actually the idea of Dar was shaped in my mind. Because I was working with 7 or 8 psychologists in Bergen, and 90% of the patients were men. They are over 50 years old. And 50 years is old in the Syrian perspective because life expectancy for men is 63. That is before 2011. And actually, I start noticing how stigmatized they are, how they are very disconnected from the community around them. And actually, they are my favorite generation because they are the one who experienced the worst in Syria under dictatorship, were tortured, and then they took this trip to Norway, not because their dream was to come to Norway, but they want to secure a better future for their children. So I really felt how unfair was the community towards them, especially there is a lot of stereotypes about migrant men, especially from the Middle East, especially at that time from Syria. And actually, while I was waiting in the waiting room for the psychologist to come in, so the patient told me, I met him already maybe 15 sessions at that time. So he looked on the table in front of him, and it was a lot of newspapers and magazines. And he told me, why don't we have something like this in Arabic? And actually, I repeated the same question. I was like, honestly, why don't we have something like this in Arabic? So that was September 2019. I guess at that time you were having the conference in Gothenburg, probably. I talked to a friend who is crazier than me and a bit more emotional than me even. And he told me, you know what, we should call it dar. And dar is home in Arabic. It's a word that would make people feel calm and welcomed. And then the next day, he's an artist. He sent me the logo. It wasn't very clear when will we start this magazine, but the pandemic made it easier to decide. Because in March 2020, as a person who understands Norwegian and understands Arabic, I would really feel the difference in information and how so many governments in the Arab world that were using the pandemic as a way to control people and spreading a lot of conspiracy theories. So I start with a simple Facebook page. The main point was to let people know what is actually happening in the Norwegian debate. The main point actually also was to make the people living not only physically here, but also mentally here, not living mentally in Syria while they exist here in Norway. And because language is power, and we wanted to share this power with other people who didn't manage actually to learn this language yet. After a few months, we went back to the main idea, was to print the magazine and have a printed magazine that people can read it. So actually, we published the first one. It was 3rd of December, 2020. And we chose that date because 3rd of December, 1825, the first journal in the Arab world was published in Egypt. So we chose to have the same date for both journals. And the response was amazing. Arab speakers, they respected and appreciated the work that we are doing. Norwegian newspapers, they were writing about what we are doing. I don't know if they read the journal, but they wrote about it. This is the most important. And then we start working. We got some fund that it was maybe enough to cover the cost for printing and to pay the fees for writers, because the first number we printed ourselves, we paid for it ourselves. And we came with a second number, which was this one. It was about racism. And we wanted people to be more known with all the phenomena of racism, about structural racism and microaggression. We wanted people to know the names of these actions that are happening around them all the time. At the same time, we wanted people to take the debate about racism in the Arab world, because there was so much tension, especially between immigrants in 2015, that we felt between Arabs and other immigrants from Eritrea and Somalia. And the third one was actually my personal favorite. As a stateless person, I've never voted in my life. I wasn't allowed to vote. But this one, it was the first time after I was granted Norwegian citizenship, so I could vote. Me and 2 others actually who work in DAR, it was the first time that we could vote. So it wasn't actually articles and essays as much as it was informations about Norwegian politics, Norwegian political parties. We came after that with 2 numbers. One about we appreciated the Arab Spring in December, and the last one was about women's rights, both in the Arab world and in Norway. This year we have also a big plan. It's the most difficult thing is actually it's all unpaid work. So we work with it after we come back from work. We will talk about climate and sport washing. As an Arab, I'm very hurted by how Qatar is using my Arab identity and promoting itself in this sport washing that is happening. And in the climate, we want people to take this debate, newcomers to take this debate, as we came very late to it because we are very busy with the dictator and the revolution. So we came very new to a community that's actually think about different problems, so we need to be part of it. We are also coming with a podcast that will tell the people weekly the news in Arabic. It will be the first of its kind in Norway. Our main goal that people, when they go to work or school or university on Monday, that people, they would know the discussion that's happening around them. Because one thing is to know the language. The other thing is actually to understand the noise, what people are talking about, what is this context that people are talking about. Just to finish this, I will just talk about a message that I got after we published this number. It was in September, a few days before the election. It was a lady who is 63 years old. She sent me a message on Facebook. She told me, my son, this is the first time. No, I've been in Norway for 18 years, and I've always voted for the same political party as my daughter. This time was the first time, because after I read your magazine, I was voting for a different political party than her. So that was actually the price for all our work since we started. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Osama, and so good to see all of you here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Elín, and I am from Tímarit Máls og Menningar, an Icelandic literary journal. I'm one of two editors that run the magazine, and it has actually been going for almost 85 years, so it's one of the oldest in Iceland. Well, maybe I should talk a little bit about, first I want to introduce this issue that we did, the first issue of last year, 2021. But before I do that, I maybe want to talk a little bit about immigration and the diversity situation in Iceland, because I think Iceland is a little bit different from all the other Nordic countries when it comes to, we're a bit late in the game, because we were for a very long time, a very, very homogeneous society. I really connected with what Coco said about being neon white. That's very much the situation there. Maybe it wasn't until this century, sometime after 2000, that immigration numbers started to rise a little bit. So in 2012, I think it was about 8% of the population. And now last year was actually 15%. And second generation immigrants are also starting to come in, so that together they were like 17%. But this has not been reflected at all in the culture. And well, just in media, you don't really hear foreign sounding names. You don't see so many people of color. And I don't hear the sort of like different types of Icelandic or Icelandic with an accent so much. And we started to discuss this, me and my co-editor, when we had a submission from a Polish-born writer that was writing an essay about how she ended up in Iceland after having kind of lived a nomadic life, traveling around Europe. And we also had a submission of a translation from Mehmet Uzun, which is a Kurdish writer that actually lived for most of his life in Sweden, came there as a refugee. And we wanted to do a theme about how kind of language travels and writers travel and how they make like a new impact in the country where they arrive, and how we could represent this in Iceland. And actually, 5 years before, there had been another issue of our magazine called What is an Icelandic Writer? And that was the former editor that did that together with the Icelandic author Sjón, was a co-editor of this issue, where they're talking about what it is to be an Icelandic author, both in Iceland, who becomes an Icelandic author. They have some voices here of foreign-born writers that are either writing in Icelandic or being published here in translation, and also about Icelandic writers that have moved abroad to Denmark or even in the 19th century to North America and writing there in new languages. And sort of, wondering what it is that makes a writer Icelandic and how that identity kind of grows. But when we decided to do this issue, we actually talked to one of the writers that had written a little piece in this first issue 5 years earlier, And we asked her to come in as a regular columnist, and her name is Eva Marcinek. She's a really talented writer and playwright and translator that had then lived in Iceland for about 8 years. And she came in and did like regular columns in each of the issues for the whole of last year, so that was 4 columns in total. And she wrote a lot about the experience of being a foreign writer in Iceland, and included a lot of her other friends and people that she knew that had come to Iceland and started writing there. So you got like a really good insight into this sort of expat community of writers and how their experience was trying to write in either Icelandic or getting their works translated and getting kind of heard and seen by the Icelandic cultural establishment. And yes, we also knew that there were other people thinking about this at the same time, that the homogeneity of the Icelandic literary scene especially, we had seen a little bit happening perhaps in the last decade of people becoming more visible in the art scene and in theater. There were more like inclusive and more representation happening there, but the literature scene was still very, very white and very, very just Icelandic. But we knew that there was a new publishing house called the Unnaútgáfuhús that was actually preparing then, when we started working on this issue, they were preparing a collection of poems by foreign-born writers in Iceland. So we contacted the editor of that collection. It's called Natasha Stoljarova, and this is then the collection that was published late last year, so quite a lot later than our issue, but some of the writers here then sent in submissions to us quite early that we could publish in our issue. And yeah, we tried to, some of them are writing in Icelandic, and it's really interesting to see this discussion that we had and tried to address in the issue that we are so unused as Icelanders to seeing different types of Icelandic or Icelandic with an accent. And we had actually seen an article by a foreign woman that was writing an article at a web magazine called Flora, or it's now called Via, I think, that has been really working on these sort of diversity and inclusivity issues. And she said that she wrote an article in Icelandic with an accent, so you can really see that there's a foreign person writing it. And it's so unusual for us to see that, and it was kind of like a call to action to Icelanders to see, you have to get used to reading this too, and listening to us, and not always like jumping in or trying to correct. It's also very common that Icelanders just try to switch over to English when someone speaks with an accent to them in day-to-day life. And it was like kind of reminding people that this is something you have to get used to now and just listen and learn, and perhaps you can also learn something new from this. And I think that's very obvious in these, then some of the poems that we had in our issue here, like from Anna, who sits here now, who actually has a poem in the issue, and also by Jakub Stachowiak, who's a Polish-born writer. And in their poems, there's this play on the language and on Icelandic that an Icelandic-born writer would perhaps not use. And it makes us see the language in a different way. And there's even a word in Jakub's poem that I know that a regular Icelandic copy editor would probably have tried to change or take out, but it really shines through the way that he has a different approach, and it makes you kind of think about the text in a different way. So we were really happy about that. Yeah, I don't know, maybe we can address some questions later in the debate. We tried also, I mean, some of there were total, this is not completely just content from foreign-born writers, but we tried to make it like a real focus of this first issue, and then to continue it rolling through last year. So we had some other translated short stories in the second issue of last year, and of course Eva's columns that continually address this question of diversity and representation, and this group of writers that are trying to find their place in Iceland. But we haven't yet really seen any material from second-generation immigrants, so that's maybe something that we want to focus on going forward, and just try to keep the literature world a little bit more open. And I can say that this collection of poetry, when it came out late last year, it got a really good reception in Icelandic media. And Natasha, the editor, actually writes in her foreword that this is like the birth of immigrant literature actually in Iceland, which hadn't been there before at all. So we are looking brightly into the future, I hope. Thank you very much.
Hej Maxine.
Hej.
Och hej alla här. Jag tänkte börja, jag ska presentera oss båda.
In English, maybe.
Oh yes, thank you. You know why she's here?
Yeah.
Because I can't think and she can.
Oh no, that's actually not true.
No, thank you, Maxine. Yes, well, me and Maxine are here because we both have worked with an issue of this journal, a Swedish journal called Ord och Bild. I'm one of the editors of the journal, much like Elin. I couldn't be the founder because it's 130 years old. So Osama has something there on us. So it's an old journal, but we're really just, even though we could discuss a lot about, I think, both failures of representation and diversity in terms of this journal, but we're going to talk about this specific project that was our first issue of 2021. It does only have, it has the name Kalam, everything we do with a language, or with language, because it's in Swedish, so maybe my translation is not so good. And I'm just going to say how this came about, because what happened was that we were contacted, so we being the editors of the journal were contacted by a writing collective, you might say, Kalam, who wanted to publish. And Maxine, Victor, you're a writer and you're also a part of this collective. So could you tell us a bit about what Kalam is, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. Kalam in its present-day form is a writers' collective, and we comprise of about 9 active members. But the number of people featured in this magazine is around about 20, which includes alumni of this collective as well. Because prior to being a collective, we actually made the transition to being a collective during the publication, while working on this publication. But prior to that, Kalam, since 2012, has been a poetry school. And most of its intake, it has its roots in Pantrana, which is in turn inspired by the Black Panther movement in America. And then it branched out into various small organizations, which one of which is Decoloniala Feminista. And then it kind of continued developing, and then it adopted the name Kalam, which means pen in Arabic. And most of the intake has always focused on youths from neighborhoods that are socio-politically as well as economically disadvantaged and also stigmatized. The collective in its present form is comprised of members who identify ourselves as people of color as well as queer.
Yeah. Interesting that you said this thing, because we as editors got to sort of watch the process of going from having been a school to forming a collective, and where your teacher, the previous teacher, Johannes Anjoros, sort of also got transformed in this process, his relationship to you. That was really, it was nice. It was also terrible to do this during the COVID pandemic, but much of it happened in the screen and in... but anyway, if I can say a few things here, and maybe now I'm misrepresenting this, but so you really came with the ideas for this issue, with what you wanted to publish, and as you said, if anybody would look, the black pages are from what you call alumni. That's people who weren't as active now, but their voices, so it's called echoes, comes in here. But even though I know, I mean, you have different backgrounds from any which way we try to understand it, but quite a few in this group, I would say, are second-generation immigrants.
Yes, correct.
You know, not all. But I think that's interesting because that is really an issue here about both how to treat the language, Swedish, or other parts of language that you may put in here, but also I think it's really interesting. I'm thinking about this, the word representation. There is a conversation. There's like an ongoing conversation in the journal that's called Layers of Representation. It's between you and 4 or 5 others.
Actually, 8 others.
Yeah, 8. Well, yeah, a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's sort of layered in the magazine there. But I'm just going to take one example because Sanna Gottby,
Yes.
one of the writers, she writes, it's kind of a short story here. Maybe it's growing into something else, but it's about her parents' background in Kurdistan. And I think it's so interesting when she says that, you know, when I'm writing about what happened to them, I know they were eating, etc. And when I write, there's a table there, and there are chairs. And then I understand there weren't a table, there wasn't any chairs. And I didn't know that because she's their child, but she's also grown up somewhere else where eating always happens with tables.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
chairs.
Yeah. Just to give you a bit of a background, Sanna Gottby is a second-generation immigrant here in Sweden. Her parents were originally from Kurdistan, and I think she was born and raised here in Sweden. Majority of our members are second-generation immigrants. There are several of us, including myself, who are first-generation immigrants to Sweden. And I mean, besides Sanna's kind of self-consciousness about the difficulties of representing her parents' reality. Conversely, Masoud, for instance, who is a first-generation immigrant who has fled from Iran to Sweden, he has experienced difficulties in being represented by other people who hear his stories. So other people kind of retell his narratives and say that this is what you've experienced and not this, for instance. Yeah, and I think that this word representation it sits quite uncomfortably with me because as a writer and as an artist, I don't talk about representation. I talk about articulation, and I talk about telling my narrative. We talk about telling our narratives rather than I'm going to represent somebody who, I think representation is a word that is used from the outside. And I think that what's interesting also is that in a collective that is made up of people who identify as being marginalized in the literary scene in Sweden, for instance, I think we kind of look at each other and we kind of teach each other in a way to navigate both our daily lives as well as our aesthetic expressions as outsiders, as the other. Like, how do you do it as the outsider, as the other, and how do I do it as well, and how can we kind of navigate through this as a collective, as a group? Yeah.
Yeah, well, if I'm going to say anything, because you have, of course, a piece of your own here, but in the conversation, it's like you really always take the role of asking the philosophical questions to the others, and I find that also very interesting.
Because I want to get to the fundamental kind of like building blocks of, hang on a minute, representation, what is that? Reality, what is that? I think that we talk about representation and we talk about reality in quotation marks, because how else do you talk about that? I talk about skin color with a sense of irony, because maybe I don't exactly, if I present myself, I'm not going to say, hi, I'm Chinese. You know, I'm going to say, hi, I'm Mexican. Like, you know, it's, yeah.
Okay, so there's obviously a lot more we could say, but I also think that maybe our time is up, so to speak, and we're going to be a part of a bigger conversation, and I think we're looking forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Kamara,
how
do you want to
sit like this? Sit comfortably, and then we'll invite the rest up. Thank you all so much. So we had yes, thank you. We had some technical issues in the last panel because we are also co-living inside this digital space right now, where ideally your questions will pop up on the computer here in front of me, and I will read some of them out loud. But to be able to get your question here from me, it means that you have to, those you are on your phones or following digitally, you have to write your question and then push the button that says ask. Ask. First push the button ask, and then ask your question, and then it will come here, hopefully. And if I don't see any questions, then I will maybe think that none of you are asking questions, or that the glitches are up again. So I will keep on iterating this. So please do not hesitate to ask. I always start my lectures when I talk about diversity with like corporations or institutions, you know, to say like every time we say there are no stupid questions, we are lying. There are so many stupid questions that you can ask, but sometimes we need them as well, so don't be afraid. But mostly, I just want to welcome all of you and say thank you for your presentations and for your work. And I think it is, as you said, Ellen, it's, the situation of Iceland is quite different from the situation of Sweden, and the situation from Sweden is quite different from like the debate in Norway as well. So we will try to navigate this conversation, but also just like in Norwegian you say you put your finger in the ground, to just like, but this might be specific Norwegian, how does that translate to Swedish or to Icelandic? And I will also try to be part of making those translations happen. But mainly, I'm just so glad that you are all here in Bergen and ready to share your experiences. And I just wanted to start maybe with a question to you, Osama, because in your introduction in the beginning, you also said that creating this magazine, that of course parts of it is to introduce a lot of the aspects that you have experienced in the Norwegian society to the Arab-speaking population that don't feel connected. But mainly it was also to integrate Norwegians into an Arabic understanding. Yeah. And I think that the notion of who should be integrated into what is something that we very often neglect to have when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. Who should be included into what, and what does it really feel to be included? I sometimes have a lot of issues with the notion of being included or being in charge of stuff that's supposed to include other people, because the power dynamic is already off. If you get to decide who is being included, then you also wield a sort of power over how they should be a bit grateful of being received. So working with your magazine, how do you feel that it has gone the other way, except for, you know, Norwegian media maybe writing about it, maybe not reading it, but at least writing about it? Yeah.
No, yeah. Like this about integration process, how we think about it in Norway. I experienced it myself when I was in asylum center and then an introduction program. As we talk about it as it's one way, like you have to study the language, you have to master the language, and you have to work, you have to pay tax. This is the only way that we think about integration. So there is this aspect of integrate immigrants actually, culturally, we don't think about it. We don't discuss it even. So when you are in introduction program, you have someone who is a road giver, someone who is like kind of a counselor that help you to actually find the way to navigate the community. And this person will help you actually so much to go, will tell you, in order to find a job in Norway, you have to go to work in health sector, because you will find like to work as a nurse or an assistant in a hospital or something. They don't tell you to be a writer. They don't tell you to be anything else, because they know it's a white profession. And the other way around, actually, that when we think about integration as Norwegians, they don't have to know anything about our problems. I think this is really problematic, because 3 weeks ago, I don't know if you've seen the news, The Guardian published a video about a massacre that happened in Syria in 2013. That place is actually 2 kilometers away from the hospital where I worked. A soldier in the Syrian army killed 290 people and threw them in a hole, and then he burned all the corpse. And then the Norwegian media actually didn't talk about it at all. I work in Bete, it's a local newspaper, but also it's also our mission also to talk about it. In Arco didn't talk about it, and actually this news, people were shaken, Syrian people. We were shaken in Norway and around the whole world, all Syrians. And I feel like to know this news is important because your colleague is Syrian, your classmate is Syrian, your neighbor is Syrian, and maybe they will not do very well at work or they are sad at school. You need to know that. So we try to write about that in our magazine. And then after that happened with the killing of the Palestinian journalist in Palestine. Norwegian media, to be fair, was good at that, especially a newspaper called VG. They were very analytical to what happened, actually. Everything that, like, people felt like, okay, now we are appreciated. They are writing about our journalist who was killed. So I feel like this kind of integration, we don't talk about it. Because your neighbor, you need to know what happened with them. Also, I feel guilty, like last week, there was election in Somalia. We know nothing about it in Norway. But it matters so much to, like there's 40,000 of Somalians in Norway. And there is 150,000 of Arab people, including Somalians, who have Arabic as mother tongue. But we don't talk anything about what's happening in their home country. So I feel like this kind of integration, that we need to listen about really what people mean about, no, Arabs are homophobics. Arab men are misogynists. But who told you that? Also in the introduction program, when I was, there is something called Samfunnskunnskap, like to study about the community. So the teacher, there was a page in that book said that we in Norway are I-kultur, you immigrants are vi-kultur. So we are the I culture, that you are the person who decide everything in their life, and you are the we culture, so someone else decide for you. But who told the teacher that someone else decided my life for me? Who told them that my father who decided everything for me? So I feel like there is a lot of things and stereotypes that we have about immigrants. The main point to start there is actually to start really being more curious about these immigrants, and not only they should be curious about my culture.
But I think also what we are, because as by the different presentations we are talking about so many different layers, but also so many different generational layers about where we are with migration and multiculturalism, or what you want to call it, diversity. Because in Norway we have been talking about, the immigrant novel, the chase for innvandrerromanen, and I think at least 22 of them have been written the past 30 years. And we're still chasing the next one and the next one. And now we are starting to understand that, okay, but it's not the immigrant novel, it's the third generation. And how long are you a third generation, a fourth generation? That the narratives also about which stories are told on whose premise is actively changing. While in Iceland, you are still now talking about that, like these first migrants authors that are coming into play. And are you watching the debate from the rest of Norway or Denmark and the rest of the Nordic region, and seeing like that that it has been going on for so long that it's becoming kind of like recycles? There's a lot of polarization regarding the topics, and to be kind of new as a country trying to deal with these kinds of issues. How are you dealing with with how the conversations already have been happening in the countries around you that are similar but different?
Well, I've been, of course, trying to follow a little bit what's going on in the other countries, mostly maybe in Sweden. But as you say, there's been so many decades of multiculturalism, and Swedes trying to figure that out, and different voices that have been heard and different novels written, that it's kind of hard for us to compare. I mean, we would like to catch up in some ways, but then also try to avoid maybe a lot of the mistakes. And I think it's a really good point that you were making about who is included into what, and what that it's not only immigrants that getting into writing in the Swedish literature scene, but also maybe Swedes learning something about other countries and getting a wider perspective of the world that they're living in, and just that the culture that they're representing is no longer a monoculture, and that should be apparent in everybody's writings, not only those that have a foreign-sounding last name or something. But I think we have a lot to learn, actually, and just hope that, things can happen quite quickly in Iceland, but I think that such a different situation having a second generation immigrant writing about, what it's like to grow up in a country and being really a part of that culture. And then what we have now, which is more people that decided to move to Iceland when they were adults and learn the language, which is a huge undertaking, and then trying to write in that language. It's quite a different situation, and I think we'll just have to see when it comes to the second generation immigrants and what they put forward and how they will be received. Hopefully not so much as a separate category, but more as a part of literature in whole. Yeah.
Because I think that when we talk about what is also tricky when we're talking about these kinds of, we're talking about journals, but we're also talking about culture journals. So in many senses, we are talking about art. And what you can see, at least in Norway, that I know more specifically, that the art sector is very much lagging behind in being able to cultivate different voices or having real diversity and representations at their workspaces, because there's something that happens in our understanding of what's important the second the word art enters the room, because you talk about quality and you talk about professionalism and you talk about craft in these kinds of, and we treat them like they're neutral words, that quality is a neutral term, that everybody knows what it is, and it is completely objective. It's not subjective at all. And when we're dealing with the art sector, there is very often a lot of expectation to how you're going to write about diversity, or how you're going to write when you are cast in the role of the person that are representing something on behalf of someone else. And it's very often with a clear demand from the majority of pedagogy and patience, and the will to integrate into the monoculture. And how do you navigate that working with Kalam and talking in these kinds of more, this kind of artist collective where you get to work on your own premises? How do you navigate going into the art sector? The Urdenbild was 180 years old. Was that the
130? But I mean,
130. Okay, well then, a youngster. But to navigate these kinds of expectations on if you're going to write the immigrant novel or if you're going to integrate, what language are you allowed to use?
We don't. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. We don't think in terms of what we are allowed to do. We articulate and we kind of. There are some of us, me included, we don't write clean Swedish, as in pure 100% Swedish. We incorporate other languages into the prose, into the poetry. For myself, I include a lot of Chinese dialects. I include a lot of Singaporean English. I include a lot of English. I include a lot of Peranakan Malay into the prose as well. And I don't. The thing is that when you include foreign words, what really irritates me is that the person or the editor of the book italicizes that foreign word, and then the rest of the text is kind of like plain text. And I think that that's an aesthetic choice and that's an editorial choice that I'm really, really against. Like you use other languages on the same grounds as the primary language that you're writing in as well. So I don't italicize like my foreign words that I use in the prose. And the other thing is that we as a collective have been very, very fortunate in receiving a lot of commissions and projects that are specifically related to issues of diversity, but also outside of it. So the latest one that we've been involved in is to write text for a Gothenburg-based artist. She's white. She is an artist who deals with themes outside of diversity and representation, but we as a collective that has these grounds have been invited in that context, and we kind of create based on that. Yeah.
And coming from Urdenbild, when you're working with these kinds of projects, and I think that's what what your journals have in common, also trying to receive these kinds of projects, these kinds of texts, these kinds of different premises of creating art? How is it received within the institutions?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and I think that also connects maybe to the conversation before, the Amanda Gorman debate. No, I'm thinking about the language as such, because I think that one thing that I do think is that it's important for Urdobild to be mainly a publishing journal so far, in the sense, but that doesn't exclude what you said, but just that some people say, well, everybody reads English, you could just as well, publish most of this in English rather than translate. But we try to publish in Swedish anyway, just to be able to, as Coco said, to form new concepts, to allow the language to go with what's happening. But that includes Swedish in so many forms. And maybe also Swedish is less of an, I don't know, cherished artifact than the Icelandic language, because it doesn't have the same kind of constraints, etc. It doesn't have to watch itself in the same way. So I think it's not a problem at all. I mean, it's not like we've heard any critique about that at all, about publishing something that might be different versions of Swedish, or just different voices. It's also a matter of style. I mean, it's a matter of writing, actually, artistic choices. So that I don't find problematic or hard at all. But there is very much debates, and I just wanted to say that also in relation to this debate you had about translations and so on. Sweden is a very politically polarized country, and it surely happens also in what we might call the cultural debate or arts debates and so on. But there are different things happening at the same time, because so translations get politicized in a way, but also we are taking translations much more seriously than before. Then in a sense, it's not only about shallow identity politics, it's about taking something serious, experiences, knowledge, what kind of knowledge. And maybe we had a conversation, Elin, in the break also about maybe also translations just as editing has to be a very collective process, as you are also working with your writing. I mean, you are a writer, but you're also a part of a group. And that would maybe add some of all this complexity that we need to,
Because I see that in Norway we have spent, of course I come mostly from the theater, but I also work as an author within the publishing houses. And the conversations, to use the theater as an example, has in Norway for the past, I'd say 10 years, 15 years, been very, very focused on visible representation. In the theater world, we have been very adamant about educating actors of color that can stand on the stage and be on the poster and be a role model and a representative for the youth, so that they don't stop going to the theater because they never started in the first place, and that the theater institution doesn't die. Like that you're trying to reach to new audiences, to bring in, to say that, look, there are people who look like you here, but that we have never had a real conversation about structural diversity. I would say that we have not yet. We just started to have the conversation about, okay, but who's writing the play? Who's directing it? Who's casting it? Who's the producer? Who works in marketing? Who's the dramaturg? Who's the head of the theater? What story are we telling, or are we just choosing to tell the same stories and the same narratives, but we are putting some makeup on it to try to make it look like the world, that we're catching up with the world that has changed? And this is the same issue in the publishing houses as well, that everybody is looking for the minority author who can come with the right story and the right book, but who is editing it? How is it being received within the house? Who is promoting it? What kind of language do they use to describe your art? And I'm wondering, within your publications, what kind of discussions are you having around this subject? About your own competency in receiving art that is maybe or maybe not outside of your work experience from before?
Well, I think in Iceland, when we started working on this issue, it was very apparent that there were lots of like grassroots groups and communities that immigrants themselves have started, like a project called Óspressan and writing workshops at the city library where foreign-born women were sitting down and working and writing together. So our goal was mostly just to reach out to these groups that already existed and, you know, just get their experience and their texts and listen mostly to what they had been doing and to let that in. But I mean, I work for a big publishing house as well, and I think that there is a risk of doing what you were saying, and that's why it feels a bit uncomfortable. So to talk about, you know, bringing immigrants into culture, like that's our, you know, prerogative, or that we have the power to do that. But I think that's just a project that we have to continually work on, to not make it like that and not just pick out one immigrant and then we have, you know, our Polish-born writer. Because Eva, that wrote these columns here for us, she has now actually published a poetry collection with Forlaget, with the publishing house I work for. And another one of these writers has published his poetry collection with other house. But I hope that it won't be the case of, just now we have a few immigrant writers that have published their works, and then, I mean, that's fine. Now we have done that, you know, that it becomes more of a continual process and more of an organic process, and not so much from above to, you know, pick up a few writers here and there. But I don't know what you think.
Well, first I was sitting here thinking also that Sweden has a lot of journals. I don't know if there's an exact match to your project, which I find very interesting, but it's just there are a lot of journals there. I mean, so the Swedish, anybody who wants to publish is not really dependent on a magazine like Ord och Bild. Maybe they would have 100 years ago, but that's not the case now. It's a very vivid scene. It does have its problems, of course, but I mean, so it's also that it comes from below and it takes its own way. So I think we just have to hope that they actually, anybody that feels excluded will try to connect, and that we will be able to get that. But we are just a few people and a kind of, you know, people working. We do have a little pay, so that's a different. But it makes a difference for sure. But it's still not a big thing. So we depend on our networks and, you know, people wanting to be a part of. Be the readers, be the eyes, be the thinkers. What is this? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this interesting? But that's also why we work with guest editors in different constellations. We did a thing with very much on Iran or from Iran. I mean, last time, our newest issue. And then we worked with somebody who's for sure Swedish, but also from Iran, and so on. And we have to do like that, I think.
No, I think for us in the collective, we've been mulling over something because Gothenburg was chosen as the UNESCO city for literature, I think. And then we got approached by Litteraturhuset in Gothenburg, and they said that Kalam could get funding if we were to start our own book publishing company in order to publish minority literature. And we've kind of been like mulling over that question, because do we want to take that post upon us? Do we want to start a book publishing company so that we can stand for the minority writers in Sweden, so that how does that work? The rest of the industry is relieved of that task? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that we as writers, as individual writers, are going to have the capacity to start up a book publishing company and do justice to the writers that we want to publish, that we want to see published. Yeah, so that's something that we're mulling over. No answers yet.
But I think that when it came to minority experiences, there was a late sociologist, social anthropologist in Norway called Marianne Gullestad, who wrote about the definition of always being alltid gjest, aldrig vert. That you were always the guest, that you were never the host, and what kind of power dynamic lies around that. But you have completely circumvented that by starting your own.
It's actually, that was one of the points that that we noticed since 2015, and I noticed how the Arab Spring, actually, you don't ask Arabs about it, but you ask Norwegian experts about it. And that was very interesting how an expert would tell the experience of someone who experienced the thing and the revolution itself. And we have a different problem, maybe, that we try to recruit Norwegian people with us, so we try to include them. But sometimes it's we feel like, no, like this story, for example, like next number is about the climate. Unfortunately, we don't have writers about the climate from the Arab world. So I was really trying so hard to find someone. So I found 3 researchers in Egypt that they are young, that they are writing now about the climate. I thought like maybe it's better to hear about it from an Arab perspective than to hear about it from a Norwegian perspective, especially that the discussion about climate had been going for years and years and years in Norway. It's very difficult for someone to put themselves and write very simple language about it. Yeah, but we were also criticized in the beginning that our team is only men and only immigrants. So we recruited a translator that she is Norwegian. So yeah. But this about like us being the host actually was one of the main things that us who should own the debate about our own issues and our own experiences. And I think we managed good so far.
But it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is.
But and speaking of more work, there is just a question from the moderator who is wondering if you have any plans or ideas of publishing there in more countries than Norway. Could there be a Swedish edition, an Icelandic edition? What's your time capacity?
No, actually, when I got the invitation from Anders about the conference, I was like, it would be interesting to have something similar in Sweden and Denmark and in Iceland. Because I know actually that, unfortunately, we don't have Arabic journals there, and the Arabic group is, especially in Sweden, is very, very big one, very, very big. The next one about the climate, we're thinking and we're planning about having only, because usually we have both Arabic and Norwegian together. So you open it from right to left, it's in Arabic, left to right, and it's in Norwegian. But we are thinking also about having digitally only in Arabic, because also, as I said, like that debate about the climate, it's not very, doesn't exist almost in the Arab world. So we want to publish it as much as possible and to collaborate with other websites that actually people trust in the Arab world, so people can take this discussion. I don't know the one about Qatar. It will be more challenging, but we will see.
You wanted to?
Well, it was just I was just thinking when we did this issue on Iran, so our guest editor, his name is Shora Ismailian, but she was writing, it's not a very long piece, but she was writing about it. She's very active in climate and writing about the climate and so on. And just taking that from the Iranian perspective was really interesting, because she also showed how social conflicts and, of course, political conflicts in Iran, it comes very much together, and the regime is actually reacting quite much against those few that try to be activists around the climate. And that's very interesting to read from my perspective, a very Swedish perspective, to see a different way of what is happening. And I think that it's opening up what the issue is and so on. And so I just find that very interesting, and I think we should know more like that.
But I do think also when we are talking about, also because this debate has been going, I think at least my entire adult life, we have still had like this conversation, the conversation in loop about diversity and representation. And even though you can see there are some structural changes, or there's a healthy fear that is happening, some places, at least like within the Norwegian institutions, about realizing that the question up until now has mainly been, can they write, can they create, are they good enough to be on our stages, to be in our bookstores, to be in, and now realizing that, oh yes, but are we competent to receive them? Is it maybe our competence that is the hindrance of progress and not the competence of the population? And also because we have talked about diversity as something quite new in Norway. We treat it like it's something that happened in the 70s when the Pakistani and Indian immigration started to come. But the Nordic region has always been a multicultural place with the indigenous population of Sami that spreads all our countries in the northern borders over to Russia in Sápmi. And we have the Kven population. We have 5 national minorities in Norway, plus the Sami population. That has always tried to find spaces within these institutions or creating their own and standing with the burden of them. If there is a Sami National Theatre, then the National Theatre of Norway doesn't have to take any responsibility for the Sami population because they can do it themselves. Like these kinds of, and these debates are in so many ways so old, so unbelievably old. And there has been Africans in Scandinavia for 400 years. So it's such an old debate, but we can see that it is slowly changing. And I was wondering, Maxine, since you have been also working with this and with the collective for such a long time, are you seeing changes? Are you seeing progress? Or is it the same loop that we're going in? That's a hard question, but I'm asking it either way.
No, I think we need to take a longer lens on this. I'll be able to answer in 10 years.
Yeah.
but I think right now we're not. We want to nuance the discussion a little bit. It's not about being. It's not about trying to be heard, but it's also trying to influence how we're being heard and how we're being seen. Not just here's a platform. Okay, like say something and then that's
get out.
That's about it. And I think that's something that I've been reflecting over is because prior to making this publication, which is quite a milestone for us, in the years prior to this, the culmination of every year was a spoken word performance festival thing. And what survives of those spoken word events are still images. You don't get to read any of the text anymore. And I think with a still image, the viewer of that still image imposes their own narrative on that still image. Whereas if you have a publication, you get the words that that we ourselves have written that represent ourselves, rather than still images of something that is already lost, the essence that's already lost. So that's something that I've kind of been thinking about. Yeah.
Can I say also, I think what you were saying here about history and so on, and it's also about this idea, that are we progressing or are we not? And I think one thing that when I sit at our editorial office, I look back at all those issues. I mean, sometimes we found, you talked about the immigrant novel. When we did an issue on cultural heritage some years ago, I found an article from early 1960s by a Latvian writer who had immigrated to Sweden, and he wrote in frustration over being the immigrant writer. And it was just crystal clear, and we republished it because, it talked to us today. And when you look back, we find this, you can find clear racist pieces if you look back in Nordisk, no problem finding that. But we can also find other things, We can find somebody trying to translate and show the Black Panther Party in the 1960s, or so we find some of these conflicts are there, will be there. The diversity thing, whatever it is also that there are interests, forces, and power play, of course, between groups and ways of expressing and so on. And publishing does give us like a historical chest to sort of look into and see what has been there before.
What do you think about that, actually?
What do I think about that also?
Because I came here 6 years ago, but you are the one who is expert here about how do you see Norway progressing in this?
How Norway is progressing. I was going to read a question from the audience. That was my next question. But I think that I've been working with this for I think I'm 34 years old now, and I've been working like professionally with this since I was 19. What I can say that I can see is changing. There has always been this when it's I think that when we have worked the past 30 years, 20 years with inclusion and diversity, at least in Norway from my experience, is that the motivation, especially in the art sector, has been a bit corrupt. That the conversation regarding diversity from the institutions, from the gatekeepers, has been this notion of, we do this because we are good people. We are so very, very good people. We vote mostly the Labour Party or the left parties, and we are anti-racist, and we, out of the goodness of our hearts, we want to include these kids in the intercities, these kids in Groruddalen, to make them come into us and feel seen, and because we are fundamentally good, and this is why we're doing it. And this insistence of goodness has been very prevalent in the Norwegian discussion about diversity. And what we're realizing now, that the kids in Groruddalen don't give a shit about the National Theatre or their good intentions or their good hearts. They're becoming irrelevant. And if you're becoming irrelevant, that means that you are slowly dying. Some of the art forms that we celebrate within our sector is slowly dying, but that doesn't mean it will disappear. It does not mean that the kids in Groruddalen won't make art. They'll make art. They'll find their language. They'll do anything. They just won't do it at the National Theatre. And the National Theatre understanding that they're, at least because of the public funding in Norway, that their right to exist is starting to seize. Their fundamental right to exist has to be about having a relevance to the populace. So I don't think that the art forms are dying. But I do think that the institutions have a good reason to be scared about how relevant they are going to stay in a 10-year perspective, in a 50-year perspective, in a 130-year perspective. And I can see that sense of urgency, that it's not about you including me, it's about you surviving. It's about you having the merit to live, to take my tax money and exist. That these kind of discussions about the arts have at least created a new kind of urgency in the discussions around diversity, also because we have so many prevalent artists that don't need your goodness. I don't need you to include me. I don't need to say thank you. I don't need to write on your premises. But me putting my work up on your stage gives you a credit that actually doesn't give me the credit anymore. So I think that power dynamic is very, very slowly, and still slow as fuck, but very, very slowly changing. And I think that this sense of, because I think that if we keep talking about diversity as a merit, if we're good people or not, our good intentions matter, and intentions will always trump action, or the consequence of an action. If your intention was good, it should trump everything. I think that the sense of urgency that's happening there will at least be very important to see how the next 10 years go. Because I think that the motivation is slowly changing. And I don't know what the effects of that motivation will be, and very often there are these backlashes of just like, okay, but then let's just retake the power, or just like reinvent ourselves within ourselves. Or so I don't know if it's going to go in the right direction, but at least you can see that this, because operating out of fear is not necessarily healthy either. But I can see that the institutions now, with a lot of anger, when you're scared, you get angry. There is a lot of backlash within the institutions of having to do this, and not because you're a good person, because you don't get credit for it anymore. It's just the government expects you to. If not, you don't get funding. Like this kind of anger that will also be part of the conversation is, I don't know what the backlash will be from that, but at least some of the urgency, I think, is healthy. That was a long answer. Now I'm going to ask, yeah. At least that's from what I see. But now we're going to take it up to a bigger Nordic perspective, because I'm going to read a question here. And that is from Peter Meanwell. How do we define the Nordic we? How can we move away from a discourse of inclusion, diversity, and move to embrace creolization as a positive force in our societies, so we expand who the us is? And can this also include Sápmi? Does this happen at different paces if countries are still dealing with legacies of inter-Nordic colonialism, Iceland, for example? But how do we define the Nordic we? And maybe, do you guys define yourself as part of the Nordic? I know there's a lot of, like, the Nordic region is being redefined right now just by NATO. What it means to be part of the Nordic communities is changing very, very drastically in a geopolitical earthquake just these days. But do we define ourselves as part of the Nordic? And how do we define it? Open question. There you go.
I can start. I define myself as Nordic, and I really enjoy these moments where we are able to talk together as the Nordic countries, and not only Scandinavia, but the smaller countries as well, because I think we have so much to learn from each other. And for Iceland, I think it's very important to have this Nordic influence in our society, because on the other, I mean, we sit on the Atlantic Ridge, on the other side we have the US and the American influence, which has been very great as well. Well, they had an American base there until very recently, and through the NATO collaboration, there's been a lot of American influence, especially since the Second World War. And for us, it's always been like important to try to hang on to the Nordic countries when it comes to these questions of just, I mean, the social network and the kind of ideals of everybody being able to take part in society, kind of away from this individualistic, Americanized kind of way that is also quite influential in Iceland. So for us, it's quite important. And I remember actually talking to the poet Athena Farrokhzad when she came to Iceland and spoke in the Nordic House a few years back. And she was kind of saying that this idea of the Nordic is kind of, a 19th century romantic ideal, and kind of talking it a little bit down. But for me, that seemed a little bit like it comes from the central country in that, collaboration. So it's easy maybe for a Swede to say that it's not so important. But for us, we kind of want to hang on, and it's really important for Icelanders to keep that going. But I think that's a really good question that came from that you were reading, because that should be a part of the Nordic ideal. I think that it is a conglomerate of different and diverse cultures, and it's not just this whiteness. It's a forward-looking kind of inclusive societies that we want to identify with.
Well, isn't it that on the global stage, it also depends on how the world has certain images of the face of a Nordic writer, and how there is a lot of inertia in kind of shifting that image. So it's not only about how Nordic countries try to reposition themselves and try to reframe themselves, but it's also how the rest of the world is allowing space for these kinds of shifts. Because in the media landscape, if I'm not wrong, I think that the impression that I get is that the face of Nordic literature is a white male who writes thrillers. It's just so entrenched. It's really, really entrenched. And I think that, it's an image that the world recognizes. It's an image that the world is comfortable with and is familiar with. And familiarity is something that kind of impedes progression and impedes shifts. Yeah. And I'm just kind of wondering, the concept of, for example, Asian American writers is so entrenched, but how, the sound of like Asian Nordic writer is so
Afro-Nordic.
Right? What is that? Yeah, I'm not sure whether that would help Asian American writers also get trapped in that, label of being an Asian American writer rather than I'm an American writer. Yeah, so I don't know. Do I present myself as that I'm a Nordic writer? I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. Yeah.
This is it's an interesting conversation. If the question is just, well, I guess I do identify as Nordic among other layers sort of identification. And when it comes to, I mean, there are historical reasons to this. But the question, which was also about how that, if we could use that as opening up for more of a creolization, was even, I hope so. And I would say that, you know, we can see that with people. I mean, when I grew up, of course we knew. I even had my parents put on a hat that was, you know, supposed to look as if it was a Sami hat. Sort of knew that. There were children's programs in Sami life, but the notion of Sápmi being there was not there at all. I think that has changed the minds of many people. We have to accept that. And that also transgresses the Nordic, because we have Russian parts of Russia in that too, and so on. I think it's really a lot of things happening there. But there was something said in this earlier conversation about languages being bridges, etc. And well, I just think that we're moving into a geopolitical situation. I mean, we're Swedish, so NATO is all over our minds and heads and bodies right now, but borders are going to be activated again, you know, the physical borders. We're not going to be in the same kind of globalized situation that we were 10 years ago. So keeping the languages and conversations and insisting on creolization, if that is the word, yes, I think we have to do that, Nordic or not.
To me also, personally.
Oh, yes. Mostly to you.
Yeah. No, oh my God, Arab, Palestinian, Syrian, Nordic. No, I don't know. It's difficult because it's yes and no. I'm still in the period where I'm negotiating myself about how Norwegian I am, how Arab I am. It's been 6 years for me in Norway. I changed, of course, in a Norwegian way. Norwegian way, not only like the society, of course, affect you so much. My girlfriend is Norwegian. I wake up with Norwegians. I hold my umbrella every day with people in Bergen. So I'm a very different person. I go and run. I go to the mountain. I never went to the mountain in Syria. Why to go to the mountain? Actually, we were going to the mountain because it was a hidden place in the mountain where couples go there to kiss each other. So we're going to the mountain. We call it Chisafiyal in Syria, Qasyun. But no, I changed a lot, of course. But am I Nordic? The perspectives that I'm talking and I'm taking now in my life, it's so much Norwegian, and in a way, it's Nordic. I think about this, like it matters so much for me, for example, when Syrians were deported from Denmark. It matters so much for me as more than if I was, for example, in Netherlands. I care so much about the last debate about what happened in Sweden with burning Quran and all of that, because I know it will affect us so much here. And I take all of that when I read the news. I take all of that, of course, with my perspectives. Of course, it affects me. So yes, to a big extent, not to a big extent, but to some extent, yes.
That was the time we had today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for sharing and for your hard work. I am very enthusiastic about reading everything. But the journals that you have published will also be available for sale. So I guess we should all just get to it. But thank you for your time today and for traveling all the way to Bergen to have this conversation with us. I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
زن نیست یک بنفش یواش است و یک سکوت گوش خراش است معجون ناامیدی و کاش است در گیجی ضمیر خودآگاه زن نیست مرد نیست عجیب است یک آرزوی روی صلیب است یک مشت سنگ داخل جیب است افتاده یک شب از وسط ماه زن مرد نیست جنسیتش باد فعلیست بین پا شد و افتاد غول است از چراغ خدازاد و حبس مانده داخل یک چاه. رد کرده مرزهای بدن را، جرداد پیش فرض شدن را، کوتاه کرده سایه زن را از پشت پای یک من خودخواه. بیگانه نیست، مال زمین است، مشکوک نیست، عین یقین است، از هر تماس سر زده مین است، پنهان شده است در وسط راه. یک پرتگاه در ته دنیاست، آتش فشان داخل دریاست، یک گور دست جمعی تنهاست، یک شعر منتهی شده به آه.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody who has been contributing to this day. It's been such an amazing day for all of us. So, but it's not over yet. For those of you who are here in Bergen, we would like to invite you for dinner. It is just around the corner at a restaurant called Tempo Tempo. And it should be ready for us at 5 o'clock. So in half an hour, we will be able to eat. And Maria, she will be there. She has a ticket for all of you for a drink in the bar also. So you can go to the lucky woman. After dinner, we will go to Grieghallen to see the opening performance of the Bergen International Festival with Taylor Mack. It starts at 6:45. And many of you have already signed up or said that you don't need a ticket. But if some of you have forgot to do that or have changed your mind, I do have a couple of extra tickets, so I hope that you will join us if you can. And after the performance, if you still have something in you, we have booked tables for us at a bar called Nedre Nygård, which is close to Grieghallen, very nice, and we can stay there into the night. So I look forward to spending this evening with you, and I also look forward to see some of you tomorrow for the workshop, early. And it will start with Anna, who will have an introduction for us. This introduction will also be filmed, and it will be uploaded on Queo. So for those of you who is not here, you will still be able to see that. So I think that's it for now, and I look forward to the rest of the evening. Thank you so much.